Welcome to the Power Up podcast. Now, today I am joined by my good friend and long-time collaborator, Colin Hiles. Now, Colin and I have worked together forever. In fact, we started out in the same business I think, Colin, this is our 31st year, if I remember rightly.
Yep.
Started in 1994, along with our dear friend, Jim Steele. And between us, we've spent decades helping leaders and organizations doing one thing they all need to do, and that is navigate change. But let's be honest, change is still hard. And we all know the stat, despite the best efforts and well laid out plans, 70% of initiatives fail to deliver the lasting impact. Now, it's not because people don't care or people aren't trying hard enough. We believe, and Colin certainly believes, he's done a lot of research on this, it's something more than that. And all will be revealed in this podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing the new science of change and a program that Colin has been working on really hard over the last year, and I think is brilliant. It's called the Bullseye Approach, a practical framework, a proven framework, in fact, that flips the way that most organizations think about behavioral change. It's about moving from the big abstract numbers and ambitions to small but high impact actions, changing what people do in the moments that matter. And when they get that right, guess what? Change, as Colin likes to describe, is not just possible, but actually becomes inevitable. So Colin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Martin. It's great to be here. It's great fun, as always, to be working with you.
Now, maybe just initially, okay, I've told everyone we've worked together for a long time, but why don't you just sort of give a little bit of background to the specific type of work that you've been doing, and specifically as it relates to this subject?
So I say my full-time job is an executive coach. I have the good fortune of working with many leaders of the biggest FTSE companies, CFOs, CEOs typically. And of course, this subject of change it's just up there as a consistent. So we are constantly talking about this. I'm certainly constantly talking about this subject with my clients, as it is. It's always on the agenda.
And if we maybe start right at the beginning, let's just talk a little bit. I mean, both of us work with clients and they come to us, and change is always on the agenda, as we know. And as we just alluded to, the stats and facts around change are pretty disappointing. Let's just sort of turn our attention to, why does it become so difficult? What actually is some of the harsh realities of change?
Well, a couple of things. I think the first thing, Zenger-Folkman's data is quite interesting on this, that the more senior you become, the more and higher the expectation is on you being able to lead change. And so it's one of those things that when you think about your brand as a leader, is your brand, the story that people tell about you in rooms that you're not in, is it a good brand when it comes to behavioral change and cultural change and leading change, change management? Because if it is, there's no question that that's going to open bigger doors and bigger responsibilities. But the hard, cold reality is it's hard, meaning that not many people can do it really well. And it's not enough at the highest level to know the vision. You've got to be able to move people in the direction of that vision. And that's the hard bit. That's the difficult bit, as we'll get into for a whole host of reasons.
So what do they, in the absence of not quite knowing how to shift the mindsets of people, what do they tend to over-index on?
So I call this, and it's one of the first things that we talk about, you're stuck in the "it must be you" trap. And what I mean by that is typically when we're trying to move people through change, we focus on the person, and we either label the person as a resistor or an enabler. And we, look at their character traits, but there's an awful, social science has been around for 70 years. It's one of the longest and most studied. And we fall foul to a bias, which is called fundamental attribution bias. Terrible title. I just call it blame bias. And what this shows is that typically when someone isn't behaving the way that we want them to behave, we blame them Funnily, though, when we aren't behaving the way that we should behave according to another, we blame the circumstance. I'm late for the meeting, it's because of the traffic. Yeah, it's because of the traffic, Martin. That's why I'm late. Yeah. Whereas when someone's late, we say it's because of something to do with their character. They just don't care, or they aren't organized enough. And so the problem is this bias causes us to narrow our focus on the person and not broaden our focus on the circumstances. And I'm sure we have time, we can get into some of one of my favorite experiments to really reveal that circumstances, situations, environment is by far the biggest influence on someone's behavior.
So you're saying that the focus is we need to fix people.
Yeah.
Actually, it's much more to do with the system and the environment that's around them that's potentially letting them down, which I could totally agree. And it is kind of frustrating because you feel like, when you come to these workshops or you do a strategy workshop or a change workshop, largely people are pretty fired up about it. There's not a massive resistance. There's some nervousness and anxiousness, but not necessarily huge resistance yet. 2 to 3 months later, people have navigated back to the same ways of working. So it's got to be something more than motivation. I know you talk a lot about this, that motivation and strategy is not enough.
No. So start with the premise, good person, bad system. If we start with that premise, what that does is it forces us to, and it might be the person, but it might not. It forces us to broaden our vision beyond the person. And the key question we have to answer is, why is this person behaving this way? And why someone behaves a certain way, it moves further than just personal motivation. And the example I give, if anyone listening on here is a parent, just consider how much time you reflect or think about the school your children are going into. Now, for some people, they will move from one county to another county to make sure they get their children in the right school. Well, why is that? Well, because they know, and we know as parents, that the school is going to be a big determining factor of bringing out what's inside that child. In other words, the outside brings out the inside. If it's got the right resources, the right teachers, the right type of children going into that school, we know that. And so we're really thinking about the system there. Good child, we don't want to put them in a bad system.
Yeah, and actually that makes a lot of sense because, let's be honest, they're being taught much the same thing.
Absolutely.
They're all having the same curriculum, they're all being fed the same information.
Yes.
But the environment they're being fed that information in and the system around them is the thing, as you're saying, is making the difference.
Yes. And so in that context, we do think about system because, one, we care about our children, and two, we want our children to learn. And if you take that same mentality into the workplace as a leader with your team, care, want them to learn, you've got to think beyond the person to what's the system that's around them. And as we know, if you change the system, you change the person.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look a little at what you describe as the sort of bullseye approach, this new science of change.
Yeah.
And I know, we worked together for a long time, Colin. I know over the last, certainly, the last quite a few years, you've always drummed on about and really been very focused on how can we substantiate what we're saying. We have a lot more I would say, a more discerning audience, a better educated audience. They're better informed. They can listen to more. There's much more science available to people. And therefore, people want to know where the science has come from. So could you perhaps talk a little bit about what has led you to creating this? What are some of the, where has some of the science come from? What is kind of drawn on, if you like?
Yeah, so as an executive coach, as you know, I have a very unusual value proposition, certainly not the only person in the world, but very rare, which is when I sign up to work with a CFO or a CEO, it's no growth, no pay, which means I'm going to work with them for a whole year and be paid zero. And then at the end of the year, if they're a better leader as defined by their stakeholders, which is 360 data and interviews, If they are better based on that, I get paid. And if they're not, I get paid zero. Now, when you put that much skin in the game, and it's a lot of skin in the game, all the pressure's my side, and I'm blind. I'm talking to you now, and the 5 execs I'm working with are doing what they're doing. I can't see what they're doing. I'm completely blind. And I'm going after the hardest thing to go after, which is behavioural change. We all know how hard it is. We all have good intentions. I'm going to get up and go for a run tomorrow and find that we have a mind over mattress moment and the mattress wins. So we've all got those experiences. So it's a tough gig. Now, in order to put that much skin in the game, you've got to go beyond just an opinion. You've got to really start to back it up in some science. And so when you look at all the sciences out there, we've got neuroscience now, which is the newest emerging, and that's breaking now into like the neuroscience of decision making, the neuroscience of social behavior. So that's great. We've got behavioral economics, which is really codified these biases and these heuristics that are in our brain that are making all these decisions on our part. We don't even know that that's going on. You've got nudge theory, which is really all about, or choice architecture, which is really all about how we're nudged based on the environment into certain behaviors. That's fascinating. You've also got social science, as I say, that's been around for about 70 years. And so in order to put no growth, no pay, I dived into all of these sciences, and I really became an expert on habits and how to break and build new habits. And when I start working with someone, fundamentally, by the end of the year, if they're going to be better, they've got to have broken and built new habits. So I was then challenged by a CFO, can you do this beyond one person? Can you do this with my finance function? And it was like, I don't know. I've never done that. And that was the start of seeing if I could bring in all this science and take it from one person to a lot of people. And that's how I started building this Bullseye idea. And yeah, we had a great year and got a great result. And of course, I've learned a lot since then.
Yeah.
But that's where it came from.
Okay, that's fantastic. Great. And I have also had the privilege of using some of this material, and it's like most kind of product development, it's often a curation of some old ideas, existing science, but it's the way that you actually bring all the components together. That's where the magic is, and that's what you're very good at doing. So let's look at some of those disciplines that underpin the Bullseye approach. You used the phrase diagnose from the bullseye. So how does that? I guess that's the start of the process.
It is. So for the listener, just think for a moment about something that you're leading and having to create some sort of change, behavioral change. There's 3 things that you've really got to get right, and the best get these 3 things right. So number 1, the center of the bullseye, you've got to be very clear on the result that you want, and it must be measurable. So what's the measurable? And often that's the hard bit. I know what result I want. How do I measure it? And that often takes a bit of thought. But when you get that right, that in itself begins to change behavior. What gets measured is what gets managed. The second circle then is, okay, so there are many behaviors that would drive towards that bullseye, but let's pick the highest leverage behaviors, which we call power moves. So up to 3 power moves that if you could get the majority of your team or department doing these 3 behaviors, it would drive towards that result that you're looking for. And then the last circle on the outside is what we call the 6 forces of influence. So now we look at the invisible influences that are always out there, are always at play, and we look to align the plan against the behaviors we're trying to build and create the new culture in.
Okay.
So once you get those 6 forces of influence, driving forces, then there's more chance you'll get the behavior. If you get the behavior, there's more chance that you will get the result that you're looking for.
Yeah. And just to give the listener a little bit more context here, what might be an example, for example, in an organisation, what might be an example of a bullseye, when you say, start with the bullseye, start with the outcome, identify the outcome, make sure it's measurable. What
Yeah.
might be an example of that?
So if I just give one, working with a FTSE company, they're a luxury brand, and the CFO really wanted to drive better business partnering through the finance function. You know, there are many benefits that will be gained if that can be achieved. And so we did a baseline, and it was 17%. So their net promoter score was 17%. Within 3 months, we managed to get it to 47%. And that's using what I've just shared with you right now. Know the result that you're looking for, figure out the few behaviors, high leverage behaviors, like lead dominoes that knock everything else down, and focus on doing those and getting more people. And then the 6 forces of influence. So, I mean, that'd be one example. But I've helped companies with managing their costs, bringing their costs down. I've helped companies with improving their leadership. I know you've done the same with engagement, bringing engagement up and increasing the engagement scores.
Yeah.
So it could be implementing a new system or a new process or a new procedure or some new IT, for instance. And we know that when new systems or processes or new technology, that it's the adoption rate that makes the difference. Yeah. And because humans being humans, this is friction. I've got to learn something. I've got to use something. I've got to press buttons. I don't know where these damn things are. Friction equals default back to easy. So I'll find a workaround and I'll do what I've always done. Even if it takes me a bit more time, at least I get it done. So helping make that adoption easier for the person can make a huge difference in 2 things: minimizing disruption and maximizing the positive benefits.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we had one of our very successful projects was around safety. I think about that retrospectively. It was a few years back now, it was 6 years ago, but there was a real single point of focus. And that single point of focus was improving lost time accidents, lost time days. There was a specific measure. They were actually part of a group, and within that engineering group, they had the lowest safety record. And this ops director came in and said, we simply cannot continue to operate with that safety record. And he was a strong advocate of correlating safety to productivity. And his argument was, if you're safer, you're more likely to be more productive. But imagine trying to get a group of engineers across 28 different sites to choose to be safer and follow more safety regulations. And so it was and it was a hugely successful project over a couple of years. That really shifted the dial. So get very, very clear on the outcome. I think, again, the mistake that organizations make is they go for too many things. They got Gantt charts full of outcomes. It's so confusing, difficult to get your head around, difficult to understand where we are. One's up, one's down, and therefore you're constantly, even if you're excited about one, you're disappointed in another. It just doesn't feel like it's achievable. It feels like an arduous, long, draining task to get to the outcome. So that idea of having a single point of focus and then deciding where is the highest leverage power moves that you can make that are going to help you get there. Of course, there are lots, but I guess the difficulty is deciding which of those they are, and then leveraging them.
I couldn't agree more. So often you see we're launching our 15 new leadership behaviors. Woo! And the reality is you'd be lucky if you get one installed. Because of just the way our brains work. It's you look at it and you kind of go, well, that's definitely not going to. So you're looking for up to 3, no more than 3. High leverage. In the world of habits, these are called cornerstone habits. These are habits like, if I get a good night's sleep, it affects many other things. It affects me getting exercise in the morning, which affects the food that I eat, which affects the fact that I start to drink more because I need to be hydrated. So one thing, that's what I call lead dominoes. One domino knocks down many other dominoes. So what you're looking for with your power moves are those. And it usually starts with just getting a load out there and having a look at them all, and then beginning to figure out, but which one out of all of these will have the highest leverage, like it will get some of these anyway. And you work back and you find your three. But I will say this, I was just speaking with the CFO this morning that I'm working with this on, that you're going to come up with your best guess. You know, it'll be your best guess. These are the three that I think are the best. And by the way, it's always, these are always decided by whoever it is that you're trying to get through the change process, or certainly the leaders. But the reality is, as Tyson said, that everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Yeah, exactly. Right. So we don't know whether or not they're going to be the three best ones, but what we're going to do is we're going to start with those, and then we'll get, let's say 2 months, 3 months in, we'll get a sense of whether or not they're quite right or whether we need to switch one out. Yeah. But what we'll have by then is what my clients and I call Mighty Mo, momentum. Yeah. You'll have momentum, and momentum is key. Then you can switch one out, put another one in, but you've got the momentum. You're still moving. You can refine one so it's even more powerful. But at least we've got momentum, and momentum is everything. As I say, Mighty Mo. We've got Mighty Mo on our side, and Mighty Mo is a great friend to have. Indeed.
I was just thinking about those big change programs you're describing there. The person who feels the best is the person who's written the program.
Yes.
I feel great about it. I've done some very important work here. You know,
yeah.
It's going to take a very long time for you to present it to you. It's been well thought out. And, and they've got, the best of intentions. But and as I say, we're trying to flip this. We're trying to say, actually, you know, that old adage of less is more focused activity.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about...
I'll just say something on that, Martin. So, you know, we used to call this in the old days that if you can give someone the responsibility or accountability, there's more chance that they'll own it. Now, we now know through behavioural economics, it's called the endowment effect, that is absolutely 100% true, that we all value more things that we own. Yeah, and so if you can hand over ownership to more people, you are increasing the likelihood. So the way that I work is on really two levels. Level number one is getting the most senior team together to figure out the bullseye. They decide the bullseye, they decide the measurable. They then communicate that to the next level down, which is generally a lot more people. And the next level down, it's up to them to come up with the 3 power moves. You see, so it's cascaded down. That's their responsibility. Then using the 6 forces of influence, which we'll get to put the plan together, that then gets cascaded down too. But here you start to get a tipping point, this endowment effect working in your favor. And as I say, that's now proven. It's not just we know, but now it's proven in terms of these biases and heuristics that we have buried in our brains.
And that is always the issue, that level of buy-in. And I think back to the safety project we did, and the one we did with another engineering company. We probably had about 30 people involved, deciding what those behaviours are going to be. And we took people from right across the business at the top, then we worked our way down, and we had people from the shop floor. So I totally subscribe to that. And they're the ones that actually become the advocates. And they're the ones that do the selling for you.
Yes.
Because they could speak a different language at that level.
That's right. Which we'll get to when we get to the 6 forces of influence. So as you know exactly what you're saying right now, we build that in.
Let's talk a bit about those, Colin, these 6 forces of influence. Just lightly go through those. What are those 6 forces of influence?
All right. So easy way to remember it is influence matters, matters, but we're going to drop one of the T's or make it a little bit smaller. Influence matter, and especially invisible influence, So going way back to, I think it was the 1940s, Kurt Lewin came out with he actually published it in the 50s, but he started working on it, force field analysis. And this was a real switch in the world of psychology, because he began to bring to our attention that there are many forces outside of us which are actually affecting our behavior. So it's not just an internal. So yes, we have strengths. Yes, we have weaknesses. But the way that we interact with the external world, the environment, and the way the environment responds has a huge influence on our behavior. So he was the first to come up with this force field analysis. So imagine around us, there's a bubble. there's a bubble of influences that are going on that we can't see, but all of those are having a factor. So if we just take, what you're sat in a chair, I'm sat in a chair, why is it that we aren't floating up into, so I'm hitting my head on the ceiling and you're hitting your head on the ceiling? Because there's something called gravity, and our weight, versus gravity wins. So let's say that, okay, we want to set an outcome of our backsides hitting the floor. Our backsides going on the floor. Well, there are two forces he talked about. So there are restraining forces, which is the chair that we're sat on. Okay, and then there are driving forces, positive driving forces. So that's my weight on the chair. Now, at the moment, the restraining force is far stronger than the driving force, which is my weight and gravity. So if we wanted to get our backsides on the floor, what would we have to do? We've got one or two choices. More weight on us, so sit an elephant on our lap. You might find that the chair just isn't quite strong enough now, and boom, our backsides hit the floor. Or we could go down with a little hacksaw and just make each of the legs just that little bit more weaker, those restraining forces a little bit more weaker, and all of a sudden the chair wobbles, and then boom, down we go again. And that's really what we're about to get into. It's really about understanding these invisible forces, MAT-ERS, these invisible forces, and how do we take any that are restraining and weaken them, and how do we make those that are positive more positive, and that way then we shift the behavior to where we want to get to.
Makes perfect sense. That absolutely makes perfect sense, and that is a very good it's a very good theory. I remember using that many years ago. You then need a framework to help people actually move forward. Okay, let's just take a few moments to go through those 6 forces of influence and why they're all important.
All right, so I'm going to use a prop for this, and every leader gets a dice. I know you've got one on.
Prepared earlier.
Yeah, the one I prepared earlier, right? So everyone gets the dice. Mine's got a dice. So let's go through. So let's start.
By the way, for the listener.
So 1 and 2. So there's 2 and there's 1. This is M of matters, which is number 1, which is motivation. So the question on this one is the person motivated to do the power moves or not? So how high is their motivation? Number 2 is all about, number 2 is all about ability, M-A, ability. Can they do what's being requested or required of them? Now, if we're stuck in this fundamental attribution error, or blame bias, we typically only fixate on are they motivated and can they do it?
Yeah.
And so, yes, they're motivated, they can't do it. Let's get them on a training program, let's sheep dip them through, and then they'll be fine. The trouble is that there's another 4 influences that are going on, and change is really a maths problem, as you know. I would not put my money on 2 beaten 4. I'd put my money on 4 beaten 2. So this is where we typically go wrong. We try to change the person and only change the person, and we should, but we need to broaden our vision a little bit more. So that goes from what's inside somebody. Now let's move to social, the social influence.
Sorry, just to pause you there, Colin. I mean, we don't want anyone to think. I mean, some people might be listening to thinking, well, I do have people who are resisting, and we're not denying that. We're not denying that. We're not saying that it's not people. We're saying it's people plus. And of course, there are people that are greater resistors, and there might be a good reason behind that. So we're not discounting that, but we are saying that quite often that's where organizations typically go to. I mean, we get a call and someone will come to us and they'll say, Martin, I'm trying to get this change to go through. People are resisting. Can you come along and do a session on, being more flexible around change and agility?
Yes.
But yes, we can, but it's a little bit of a sticky plaster, and they will come along and they will get some tools, but they don't actually necessarily agree, or they've gone, well, let's go on to the social dynamic, and then we can explain why that individual motivation of that individual suddenly gets diluted.
Exactly right. So if we go now to forces 3 and forces number 4 here. So now force 3 here. is tribe. So it's the T of matters, tribe. And this now is about the size of the group that's around the person. What are those individuals doing? Because there's a lot of research out there, Solomon Ash's research that he did in the 1950s that showed how much we conform with the norm. We don't want to be rejected. You know, I want my that tribe that I spend time with to like me. I don't want to be rejected by them. And if doing the new thing equals rejected by the tribe, there's a higher probability that I won't do the new thing. I'll do the old thing because the tribe accepts me. So this is a biggie. This is really dealing with peer pressure, the power of peer pressure and how peer pressure drives us to behave certain ways. So we need to get peer pressure working on our side. The next one then is number 4, and number 4 of our 6 forces of influence. This is example. This is the E of matters. This is example. Now, this is anybody who is in an influencing position. This is senior people. Because, as I say, people don't do what you say to do. They do what they see you doing. I can't be what I can't see. So if I can't see my leader doing it, I can't be someone that does it. Simple rule. You have to be the example. What do you want them to be? Then they need to see it. So if you want these new behaviors, these 3 power moves to be driven in to create a new culture, you have to do those power moves. You can't be a do-to. They need it. I don't need it. Well, unfortunately, you've got to role model it. It's very, very important. And once again, Stanley Milgram's experiment in 1960, I think it was 61, is just one of the most powerful ones to show how we're influenced by authority figures and how we will typically comply to what they want us to do for the reason that we do not want to be rejected by someone we see as authority. So this is a big one. This is a huge one that will make a big difference. Now, if you get those 2 right, you get 3 and 4 right, and now you've got everyone beginning to adopt these new behaviors, the leader doing it. It doesn't matter if they're not that motivated, it doesn't matter if they're not that skillful, you're going to nudge them towards doing it. Because the outside is more, it goes back to that good person, bad system. Now we've got good person, good system. Now we've got the system beginning to be set up that will nudge the person towards the behavior. And just one example. So let's say that we work together and I need you to do a report for me. And you're consistently late with this report. Now, because of blame bias, I'm going to label you and talk about you in rooms that you're not in very negative ways. You are now a hindrance. You're making me look bad. But what I can't see is your loyalty is to someone else or your boss, because you get rewarded by doing that one. You don't get rewarded for doing mine. I can't see that. I can't see it. So I'm blaming you when actually I need to broaden my vision and see the bigger picture of what's actually causing you to behave that way. And there's no question that when we go through all 6, the social element is by far the biggest, because businesses are people.
It's huge. I mean, it's if you think about our own social setting, you know, we hear the phrase time and time again that we become the average of the 5 people we most closely associate with. I mean, just think, I was actually, talking to you and I are very much into our health and diet, etc. And this particular chap was explaining to me how, he'd been trying to lose weight for a very, very long time. But he got this new trainer and he said, right, cut your training down from 5 days a week to 3 days a week. You're doing too much, but follow this diet. And he said, my biggest challenge is my family, everything, and everyone around me. What are you doing that for? What are you doing? What are you doing that food for? What are you doing this for? Why don't you do that? That's not going to work. And he said, I am constantly I've now got past it, right? But there were several times when I just started to question and influence and be influenced by these people. By the way, as he said, in not being disrespectful to them, weren't particularly of the size that he was aspiring to, right? So, right. The guy giving the instructions was, right?
Yes.
But, it was interesting to see, you hear this time and time again, you would get influence. As you say, it's a mass problem. If there's many more people out there influencing your mindset, it's going to get suffocated. And
Yes.
go back to, I think back to going back to my safety thing again as well. As much as an individual knows they need to put the harness on, wear the high-vis jacket, clear up the mess, if everyone around them isn't doing it, they actually feel like Mr. Goody Two-Shoes.
Absolutely, and then they get the Mickey taken out of them, right? They get banter. They get the Mickey taken out of them.
Well, and the tipping point in this program, why it was so successful, is because they called it safety with attitude. So in other words, what people had to do is they had to adopt this a bit of an attitude about safety. So you're almost making safety a little bit cooler, rather than uncool, goody two-shoes, following the process. And then it just becomes the norm for people to actually pull each other up on not being safe. So it is critical, and we don't put enough effort into it.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
I couldn't agree more. So if we move on to number 5 and number 6. Now, number 5 and number 6 takes us into the environmental. So this is everything non-people now. This is where we're going. So number 5 on this is reward. So this is the R of matters. This is rewards. And, we know what gets rewarded is what gets repeated. It's a basic principle of the way our brains work with dopamine reward system and so on. So this one deals with things like pay or recognition or performance reviews or perks. It's that sort of thing. And it does not have to be monetary. I mean, some of the most powerful that we've adopted and we've used with my clients is just simply being rewarded, being recognized, name flashing up. That in itself can make a big difference. So now you're beginning to show that we want you to do this and we're going to reward you for doing this. It's a very powerful way to move people in the right direction, and finding ways of recognizing and rewarding when someone does any one of the 3 behaviors is a really smart thing to do. And then the last one, number 6, this is space. So this is the environment. So this is things like tools and facilities and data and reports, proximity to others, policies. It's all of those things. It's how do you use those things which also nudge people. So we've got 2 that are inside, personal, M&A, motivation and ability. They're both important, as you said. The reality is, however, even if those aren't quite right, but you get the other 4 right. So now I'm beginning to see more people around me do these behaviors. As you say, it's cool and trendy to do these behaviors. I've got my boss that's doing this behavior. I'm seeing people getting recognized for doing this behavior. Their names flashing up. They're getting a little clap and a round of applause. And then there's the non-human things also that are beginning to nudge me. Well, you'll get me because it's 4 against 2. I'll begin to move in that direction or I'll move out, one of the 2. And so that's why really thinking and broadening our vision and putting a plan together to make sure that we get all 6 forces of influence at play. As you said, what we do is we make change inevitable.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's inevitable at some point then. We don't know how long. I mean, we can't say how long, but it becomes inevitable that you will get that change. And that's the power of Bullseye and this new science and, using a very simple, it's systems thinking for dummies. It's just easy. Anyone can pick it up very quickly. You don't even have to know that much about it, and you certainly don't have to focus that much on it. But once you get your head around it and you begin to apply it, boy, it can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and of course the work that we do is taking this methodology and implementing it, guiding people through. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about the workshops and things that we do around it.
Yeah.
We actually use within our business and natural direction, we use a sort of 5-phase pathway, which we kind of is like the big macro kind of version, which is signing people up. This is the sort of what you might describe as diagnosing towards the bullseye.
Yeah.
Doing the diagnosis up front. Where are we at the moment? What's the start point? And then we use a phrase called join up, which I coined from Monty Roberts' book Join Up. The concept of breaking a horse through horse whispering, a very famous horse whisperer. And it's kind of what you were alluding to earlier, when you involve people, when they join something, you join a club, you're not forcing it upon them, you're inviting them to join. That's very powerful. So engaging your social influencers and designing the change system with them, using the 6 forces. Then you get to show up, which is engaging the wider team, bringing in more personal influencers. Then you can really begin to power things up. You really start to see the implementation of these environmental influences, which might take a little longer because potentially changing systems and processes with an organization might take a little longer to do.
Yeah.
But as people can start to see, actually, that process we've got, or the way that we're, penalising for people not being safe, is actually backfiring. So let's rip the posters down, right? Let's stop this sort of draconian penalty process, and it's something you often allude to, Colin. You say, you focus on the gain, not on the gap. It's a very powerful concept. And then you, like in any sort of change curve, you get the resistance, you start to power up, you then end up flourishing, and you have to make sure you keep people there. So it's a kind of pathway that makes change, embeds change, but makes it sustainable over a period of time.
And what that does is that we know that there's going to be lags and dips. So lag is how long it takes from setting the vision and getting started and launching something to it actually being embedded. That's the lag. And then you've got the dip in productivity, the dip in performance. And what you've just spoke about there, combined with what we're talking about with Bullseye, what that does is it shortens the lag. Now that's going to save quite a lot of money. It's going to minimize any disruption that's going on as well. So it shortens the lag, and it sort of, the dip isn't so deep in here. And so that's why these frameworks are so helpful for leaders, because you really want to shorten the lag and you really want to minimize the dip. And that's what, in my opinion, makes phenomenal cultural change, behavioral change, when you can do that, and you can do that very, very well. And it just means that you have to be strategic. You do need frameworks like the framework you've just shared, like Bullseye framework, and you need to put your change into those frameworks and let the framework do the work and all the heavy lifting for you. What it spits out at the other end is the plan that's going to make change inevitable. I love that.
Let's just finish off by talking about some of the practical application of this, and how we can help clients with this sort of body of thinking and this program. Inevitably, to introduce the idea, to actually implement it, there are 3 kind of stages, aren't there? 3 workshops.
Yeah.
Briefly describe those. I mean, you did quickly mention it earlier.
Sure. So, and these can be done virtual. I know you've done virtual. I've done virtual as well. It can work, or it can be done live in a room, depending on your context and where your people are. If they're scattered all over the globe, still possible. So typically it starts off with the senior leaders. So with the leader and the senior leadership team, that's where it starts. And that's typically a half day on really getting clear on the bullseye. What is the result we're going after, and how are we going to measure that result? And I know you've had this, I've had this. The amount of times leaders have said to me, I couldn't believe how difficult it was to come up with measurable. It's a chewy one. And that's why often it's not done. We don't really go after the measurable, because it actually is quite difficult to do, but it makes all the difference. So that's a half day. Then we move into the team that sit below that team, and we have a full day. And that full day is really beginning to get clear on the 3 high leverage behaviors, the power moves, the habits that are going to drive towards that bullseye. So that's the responsibility of that community. And then day 3 is where we get everybody together. I mean, everybody from workshop 1 and everyone from workshop 2 together, to then go through the 6 forces of influence and actually put the plan together. And we look at the 3 W's here. So what is it we need to do? When do we need to do it by? And who's responsible for it? So there's a clear plan at the end of the day. There's usually then a time period to get everything together, because you may have to go out there and get a baseline measure, which takes maybe a month or 2 months, 6 weeks, whatever. and for the people that are responsible for the different aspects of the plan to go and do what they need to do. So let's say that there needs to be a 1-hour workshop, an upskilling workshop. Well, could we do that virtual? Could we use AI now? Could we have an avatar that's just basically giving people what they need? All that stuff needs to be looked at. So there needs to be a time. Then you do the launch. Then the launch happens. And then once the launch happens, then that's when it's about refining the plan, refining the 3 power moves so we get it absolutely right, so that by the time, if you want to do this within a year, you have got the result you're looking for. But as you saw with that client I spoke about, 17% to 47% in 3 months. That's a huge jump. And for such a small amount of time investment and monetary investment, I mean, that's everyone was delighted, as they always are, because that's a fantastic result.
And I mentioned the safety example, which was resulted in literally within a year and a half they went from the worst scoring safety to the highest, to what are called ROSPA Safety Awards, Gold Awards. The QHC has been invited to conferences to talk about the results. It's one of its truly fascinating project to be involved with, because the majority of the people you're trying to change the behaviour if are so far removed from the senior team.
Yes. And
they were really just, relying on supervisor managers with a rule book, So that was great. One other example was engineering, 550 odd engineers of a very large organisation running a critical infrastructure. And the chief engineer, he wanted more. He was sort of saying it frustrates him. You've got these bright, sharp people, and they're doing a great job of fixing stuff, but they're not thinking. We don't know whether or not we're servicing this piece of machinery or air conditioning unit or whatever it might be too often. Not enough. They're the people that are closer to the coalface. And his whole idea was that, and he had this sort of 4 or 5 key. He started off with these 4 or 5 key behaviours. And the reason we started to work with him is he couldn't get traction on them, because he was doing the classic, we've done it, we've described it, send out the PowerPoint, get the supervisors on the front line to tell people about it, and he was a bit disappointed he wasn't getting traction. And I think this is where our expertise, and I don't mind being very strong and forthright about this, but I think our deep expertise that we have both learned over many years is how to shift behaviour. It's one thing we do very well. And often leaders are listening to us and go, well, how are you actually doing that? I mean, there is a science to it. We're using our experience of using science, playful fun, serious fun, curating very, very powerful workshops with very meaningful exercises, not patronising exercises, but exercises that make sense to people.
Yeah.
And I think it's that combination of science, making it real for people, and then having a really simple, practical application that people can go and use. I always describe it as you've got the science, you then have the model and the framework, but then you apply it to something. The thing I really like about Bullseye in particular is you're not going on a learning program, you're just learning about change, and you come away with all these different ideas, but you're not applying it to anything. Whereas here, it's an immediate application. Immediate. Looking through what we're talking about through the eyes of the change we're trying to make.
Yes.
So that's the really powerful bit, and that's why I think it works. Well, it does work.
Of course, if you're working with the senior, each one of these senior leaders have got their own change challenges, and they're all being taught Bullseye.
Yeah.
So we're doing it on one, which is typically has been sponsored from the very top, but each of them will be required to facilitate some sort of change or lead some sort of change. So they can instantly apply Bullseye to their own change challenge. They know exactly what the center circle is, what the circle outside is, what the 6 forces of influence. They've got a dice on their desk, so it's reminding them, go after 6. Go for the 6, or roll a 6 is what you're trying to do. And of course, you're almost getting, it's like a double win. You're getting the win of the big one we're going after and the win of lots of little ones that all of the leaders are trying to change. And when you start adding all that up and the compound effect of that, it's enormous, really.
Yes,
Yeah.
huge. Okay, so let's maybe just in summary to leave people with a few thoughts about what we've been speaking about today. I guess probably the first thing is this thing around change doesn't just happen because of intent, it happens because of the systems around them.
Yes.
And that is something that maybe people aren't paying enough attention to, be the first thing.
Yeah.
Perhaps the second thing I would say is that this Bullseye approach is so focused that it's taking the guesswork. I agree with what you said, that there is a certain amount of using our intuition at the beginning.
Yeah.
But because of the process, we very, very quickly do end up pinpointing those particular behaviours that are causing you to go in the wrong direction,
Yeah.
and the ones that will perhaps cause you to go in the right direction.
Yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to add or leave people with, Colin, that you think might be useful if you're a leader listening to this, or you have responsibility for a small team? This is equally applicable. You can apply it in a large setting, you can apply it in a small setting. The psychology of change is actually the same.
So maybe three things. So firstly, remember, careful not to fall foul of the "it must be you" trap. This bias that we have, you have to become aware of it. It will get in the way otherwise. You gave the story of the individual that wrote everything, did everything, sent the PowerPoint, and that's that bias that's getting in the way. That should be enough, and it's never enough. So that's the first thing. Secondly, you increase your influence by broadening your vision. So remember, good person, bad system. Let's broaden our vision and bring the system into play as well as the person. And that's so important. How do we do that? Well, three things. Number one, you get clear on the bullseye, what's the measurable, what you're going after. Number two, get very clear on the three high leverage behaviors that will drive it. And number three, use the 6 forces of influence in which to, one, diagnose what's actually going on, and then once you put the plan together, drive towards the bullseye. If you do that, you will become someone that is known to be very, very good at driving positive behavioral change. And that's good for your brand, and it's also good for business.
Absolutely right. Perfect. That's fantastic. Thank you for that great little summary. We will be discussing this further at an event we have in London on the 8th of May, details of which will be in the show notes, called Culture Shift. If you want to come along to that, it's totally free of charge, and come along and be part of the discussion, and then bring your own change stories, good, bad and the ugly. We're really interested. Everyone's got their own experience of leading change. So, and as you said, if you become an expert in this area, you will build a very high recognition. Right? We know the leaders we work with, those leaders that can combine great leadership, but at the same time is actually deliver results, at the same time as actually deliver change.
Yeah.
It's a very, very powerful combination.
That it is.
So, yeah. So thanks for the chat, Colin.
Thank you.
As always, our promise of these podcasts is to deliver value, deliver practical ideas that people can apply in their own lives, in the lives of the businesses that they lead, and indeed, even at home, all right? You can still apply these same things. The psychology, the brain we carry around with our head is no different. So have some fun with this, and if you want to speak to Colin or me, then reach out to us and we'd be delighted to chat to you about it. So thank you very much. As we always say, you are adding value to others if you share this with them. So if you think there's something in here you want to share with somebody, then please do. And as always, let us have your feedback, and we always appreciate that. Thank you very much.